This is The World This Weekend. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight, evacuees struggle with uncertainty as wildfires rage for another weekend in Alberta.
I've been in Fox Creek for 17 years and my house is paid off, and I'd hate to see that go up in smoke and have to start all over again.
Also tonight, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky makes a last-minute in-person visit to the G7 summit to plead for more aid.
This is a key opportunity for Zelensky to be in the room, not just with the G7 leaders, but also with their outreach partners.
And the fight over a New Brunswick school policy and what it means for vulnerable students.
If a kid tells us that their parents are not accepting, then it's important that we keep their confidence and keep them safe while they're at school.
That's later, but first. Another hot, dry weekend is creating hazardous conditions for wildfires in Alberta. There are currently 91 active fires in the province. 25 of them are burning out of control. And with camping season getting started, officials are warning Albertans to be cautious this May-long weekend. Cindy Evans is with the Alberta Emergency Management Agency.
We are asking all Albertans to remain informed. Please continue to follow updates on the wildfire situation across the province and obey all fire bans and restrictions in place. And please stay safe.
The town of Whitecourt, Alberta, has turned into a refuge for people fleeing the Fox Creek fires. The CBC's Kayla Hounsell is in Whitecourt.
As it was quite the ordeal for us.
Dwight Straub stands outside a motel in Whitecourt, northwest of Edmonton. He and his wife have been living in a room here with their 2 teenage daughters and 2 large dogs for 2 weeks since they were forced out of their home in Fox Creek.
I've been in Fox Creek for 17 years and my house is paid off, and I'd hate to see that go up in smoke and have to start all over again.
The Fox Creek fires, known as the Eagle Complex, are a priority for crews battling the flames. They say they are very active and exhibiting extreme behavior. So far, they've been able to keep the fires out of the town itself, but they are close to the edge. Brian Davidson is Fox Creek's fire chief.
It's just in so many different areas, so we do have ground crews running around at night, just keeping eyes on hot spots, any kind of potential breaches.
Wesley Upshaw left Fox Creek with only the clothes on his back and a small bag of toiletries. A local church in Whitecourt is now the hub for evacuees to get food and supplies.
They have breakfast, good breakfast, good supper or dinner in the evening. I heard they're going to have chicken tonight.
The town of less than 10,000 now hosting roughly an extra 2,000.
Well, this is day 15 for us.
Whitecourt's mayor, Tom Pickard, says his town is used to forest fires and always planning to have unexpected visitors.
We're fortunate that we can host and we don't have to be hosted. We feel fortunate.
Even here, thick smoke hangs in the air with ash falling all around. Pickard says there is no threat to Whitecourt at the moment, but he knows that could change, and he's planning for that too.
You know, we're one lightning strike away from that, and if that were to happen, we're ready.
Rain is in the forecast for early next week, and the temperatures will begin to dip. Long anticipated and so desperately needed. But officials warn while it will help, it will take a prolonged response to get the current situation under control. A difficult reality for residents of Fox Creek who just want to go home. Still, Dwight Straub says he's grateful for his neighbors.
I wish I could do the same for them if the occurrence happens the other way, where they have to get evacuated. I'll stick my neck out for them 100%.
Wildfire season typically lasts until October. Already this year, there have been nearly 500 fires across Alberta, almost as many as the last 2 years combined. So far, they have scorched an area 1.5 times the size of Prince Edward Island. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Whitecourt, Alberta.
Now, outside of Alberta, 29 fires are burning in Saskatchewan with only 7 under control. 2 of the largest ones are threatening communities in the north. All Crown lands and provincial parks north of the province's Yellowhead Highway are currently under fire bans. In the Northwest Territories, light rain provided some relief in the efforts to contain the Hay River fire, but as of now, it is not under control. That fire was last mapped at just under 3,000 hectares in size. And in British Columbia. Thunderstorms are predicted for the regions affected by wildfires. There are currently 83 active fires. 27 are out of control in that province. To Japan now, where the Group of Seven is entering a final day of talks. In a statement from the Prime Minister's office, Justin Trudeau outlined investments that Canada and other G7 countries are making, including hundreds of millions of dollars for green energy projects, food security initiatives, and future pandemic preparedness. G7 leaders also agreed to support Ukraine against Russia's invasion for as long as it takes. That is being celebrated by Volodymyr Zelensky.
Не буває такого дня, щоб Україна.
The Ukrainian president says not a day goes by without Ukraine getting stronger. Zelensky has been going on a diplomatic blitz in Hiroshima, pushing for more military aid to his country and for G7 countries to tighten the screws on Russia. The CBC's Murray Brewster is in Hiroshima and brings us this report.
A French government jet rolls to a halt on the tarmac at Hiroshima, an arrival that seizes the attention of the G7 leaders summit. Volodymyr Zelensky bounds down the stairs to be greeted by Japanese officials and then whisked away in a motorcade.
This will overshadow almost certainly everything else that might come out of the summit.
Tristan Naylor is from Cambridge University and is the deputy director of the G7 research group, which tracks the work of the Group of Seven countries. He says Zelensky's presence at the summit has the potential to be an historic turning point in the Ukraine war.
This is a key opportunity for Zelensky to be in the room, not just with the G7 leaders, but also with their outreach partners. Most importantly, Zelensky is able to meet for the very first time face-to-face with Narendra Modi, who is pivotal if anything is going to change.
It was only just recently that India's Narendra Modi described his unbreakable friendship with Russia's Vladimir Putin. The Ukrainian president invited Modi to join the peace process. In their meeting late today, Modi told Zelensky the whole world is feeling the weight of the war and it's an issue for humanity. Observers say the fact Zelensky feels comfortable enough to go to the G7 speaks volumes.
I don't think he would have come if he thought that he was going to leave here empty-handed.
And it's becoming increasingly clear Zelensky will not be disappointed.
We have delivered what we promised. We have given Ukraine what it needs based on close consultations between our military and theirs.
Jake Sullivan is the U.S. National Security Advisor. Washington is now ready to allow Ukrainian pilots to be trained on F-16s, signaling more clearly than ever that advanced warplanes are on the way.
And now we have turned to discussions about improving the Ukrainian Air Force as part of our long-term commitment to Ukraine's self-defense. So as the training unfolds in the coming months, we will work with our allies to determine when planes will be delivered, who will be delivering them, and how many.
Zelensky's arrival pushed other G7 business to the side and caused leaders to release their final communiqué today, one day early. Aside from committing to increased diplomatic, humanitarian, economic, and military support for Ukraine, the leaders made a range of climate and food security commitments to which Canada pledges more than $500 million. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Hiroshima, Japan.
Today has seen protests in Iran, in Canada, and around the world after the Iranian regime executed 3 more political prisoners yesterday. They were sentenced to death for their role in huge anti-government protests last year. As Philip Lee Shannock reports, people are expressing their outrage, anger, and sadness.
In the Iranian capital, Tehran, people defied authorities, shouting "Death to the Islamic Republic" from their apartment balconies. Across Canada, protesters held rallies in support. In Halifax, organizer Ziba Mashkuri says she hopes one day her daughter will be able to visit a free Iran.
We have to fight. We cannot just sit and mourn and cry and do nothing. We have to stand strong and fight our fight.
In Toronto, hundreds rallied at the provincial legislature. They denounced the hangings of Majid Kazami, Salamir Hashemiri, and Saeed Yagobi behind prison walls. The three were protesting the death and custody of Massa Amini when they were arrested and found guilty for their alleged role in the deaths of three paramilitary officers.
I cried.
Bida Maftoon was moved to tears when she heard the Islamic Republic had executed the three protesters, despite appeals from human rights organizations. Then she became outraged.
These are the savage actions that these Islamists have committed.
Hamid Ismailian is former president and spokesperson for the Association of Victims' Families of Flight PS 752. He's become a global leader for anti-regime protests.
This is a message to the free world. We need to see some actions. Honestly, the revolution happens inside Iran, and the people of Iran have to finish it, but we need the support of the free world for us.
Ismailian has called on Canada to expel members of the Iranian regime here in Canada and label Iran's Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization. The Canadian government says it's aimed sanctions at the regime and 147 Iranian individuals, including members of the IRG. Raha Bahraini is a human rights lawyer for Amnesty International. She says governments around the world must punish Iranian authorities for using the death penalty as a tool of repression.
To identify officials who are responsible for these crimes under international law and to open criminal investigations against them and consider issuing arrest warrants.
And opponents of the regime inside Iran and around the world say after a lull, protests have been reignited and won't stop until change comes to Iran. Folkley Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
Voters in Turkey will head to the polls again next weekend in a runoff election that could shake up the country's government and potentially end the two-decade rule of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In the first round, Erdogan's party did surprisingly well in regions devastated by February's earthquake, with many Turks who fled those regions returning home to cast their ballots. While the disaster, which killed more than 50,000 people, may not have changed voting patterns, it has left a permanent scar on 11 provinces, which are in the midst of an overwhelming recovery process that could take years. The CBC's Briar Stewart visited the southern province of Hatay, which borders Syria. I spoke to her earlier from Istanbul. Briar, can you bring us up to speed with the state of things in Hatay now?
Hatay province was one of the hardest hit areas after these two earthquakes. In fact, more than 200,000 buildings either collapsed or were severely damaged. And in Hatay, the capital city of Antakya, several blocks still lie in ruin. There are heavy trucks that have started to move away some of the rubble, but part of the city looks as it did just right after the earthquakes, particularly in the historic city center where there are hotels and restaurants and several churches. And it was near there that we met Mehmet Serkan Sinkan. Now, he's an antique dealer who stayed in the city even though his home was severely damaged and he lost one of his businesses. He still has an antique business, and in a kind of a surreal scene, he had a lot of his antique furniture out on the streets because he was worried about them becoming more damaged if there were additional tremors. He's staying in kind of a vacant building that he believes is safe enough, but tens of thousands of others are living in tents and trailers. And Serkan talked a little bit about all of the anger and frustration because so many buildings were destroyed in the city, including some which were only a few years old and should have been built up to the building codes that were introduced in 1999.
I want from my government, they have to go back 50 years. Everyone who have make not good things, or they have to pay some things because they make it not good, the job, and people die. Children die. Everybody die.
So after so much destruction and now these calls for buildings to be built up to the proper code, what are we seeing in terms of the rebuilding?
Well, in Antakya, there really was not any rebuilding going on, and that kind of contrasts with what Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan promised earlier. He said that all the homes would be rebuilt within a year. Now, Erdogan, who is currently campaigning to be re-elected, made that promise, but the governor of Hatay province, who I should say is affiliated with the opposition, says rebuilding that quickly isn't realistic or wise. In fact, in Hatay, there were several areas areas where businesses should not have been built in the first place because the ground is so unstable. And a prime example of that is the Hatay Airport, which was built right on top of a fault line. And there were numerous warnings from scientists about its location even before it opened. The governor also told me that in the city center, some part of it will not be rebuilt. And instead, there are plans to make a public green space, perhaps a park, because it's just not safe for people to be living there.
Okay, the CBC's Briar Stewart in Istanbul. Thank you, Briar.
You're welcome.
New York City is sinking. Maybe not by a huge amount each year, but a new study says it's enough to make the city vulnerable. The CBC's Chris Reyes has the details.
New York's leaders have been sounding the alarm in recent years about the city's vulnerability to extreme weather and flooding. Just one example, in 2021, entire streets were underwater in Queens in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. Recent storms have flooded subways, downtown streets, and other low-lying parts of the city. That problem may get worse faster because of a critical finding in a new study published in the Earth's Future Journal. Stephen Daunt is one of the study's researchers.
The weight of the buildings, the weight of the infrastructure itself puts a burden on the ground and causes sinking.
That weight on the city from about 1 million buildings, about 1 trillion kilograms, causing a sinking of about 1 to 2 millimeters per year, according to the study.
Parts of New York are going to see the impact of sea level rise twice as fast as people generally assume.
That buildings sink is not new to engineers, but Daunt says the importance of the study's findings is in looking at the combined effect on a city of all the buildings.
For me, the core message is that we need to be mindful about the changes around us and about what we're doing and how it causes the land to sink, how it causes the sea level to rise, and how we want to respond.
A message that could make or break the cities of the future. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Celebrated British novelist Martin Amis has died. Amis published his first novel, The Rachel Papers, in 1973 when he was only 24 years old. By the 1980s, his novels Money and London Fields launched him to the status of literary rock star in Britain, along with his contemporaries like Salman Rushdie and Ian McEwan. He was the son of famed author Kingsley Amis, though as he told the CBC's Writers and Company in 2020, the two did not see eye to eye when it came to the craft of writing.
His tastes were actually lower middle brow when it came to reading. And he liked to read thriller writers. And he once said to me, he said, I'm never going to start to read another novel ever again unless it begins with the sentence, a shot rang out, or a scream rent the air. And he found my stuff too compulsively vivid, he said. He said I should write more often this kind of sentence, : he finished his drink and left.
Martin Amis died Friday of esophageal cancer at his home in Florida. He was 73 years old. You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans has ordered part of a lobster fishing area off Prince Edward Island to close down after sightings of 2 right whales in the area. The species is endangered, and the DFO says fishing traps need to be removed from the water by Tuesday. The closure still allows fishing in waters shallower than 18 meters. Chris Wall is a lobster fisherman in Malpeque.
Well, this is the start of a slippery slope of whale closures. I think there has to be a happy medium, but I mean, there's never been a whale entangled in lobster gear and PEI, so until there's an entanglement, I think we should be able to fish as we have fished.
The fishing area is set to reopen after 15 days if there are no more whale sightings during the closure. Military cannons rang out in downtown Moncton today to mark the 175th anniversary of the 8th Canadian Hussars Cavalry Regiment. The Hussars officially formed in 1848, though their roots go back to a Loyalist cavalry unit in the American Revolutionary War. After the British defeat, many of the men in that unit settled in what is now New Brunswick. The unit took part in several military campaigns, including both World Wars. Princess Anne took part in today's ceremony. Tomorrow she will travel to Sussex, New Brunswick, where the 8th Canadian Hussars was founded. Staying in New Brunswick now, where LGBTQ advocates are concerned over a review of a 3-year-old school policy. It's aimed at creating safe and inclusive spaces for students. The provincial government says it's reviewing the policy because of supposed complaints. But as Hadil Ibrahim reports from St. John, there are worries the province could roll back protections for vulnerable students.
Across New Brunswick, high school students walked out of class, protesting a decision by the provincial government to review a policy meant to protect LGBTQ youth. Some, like Emma Wadman in St. John, are afraid the protections guaranteed by the policy will be revoked.
Before this bill, I've had experiences with extreme homophobia. I've had people tell me that, I deserve to be killed and, stuff like that.
Policy 713 was first adopted in 2020. It says schools must have gender-neutral washrooms, and teachers must use gender-neutral language as much as possible. While students under 16 still need parental consent to change their names on official documents like report cards, the policy states if they want to go by a preferred name or pronoun in the classroom, teachers can't inform parents of those changes without the student's consent. And it's that provision that appears to be driving the review.
It's that sort of belief that parents don't need to know.
Premier Blaine Higgs says the policy needs to balance the rights of the students and of the parents.
Suggest that it's okay that parents don't need to know. I mean, let's just stop and think about that question.
I never, ever, ever had a parent even inquire about it.
Retired teacher Gail Costello helped write the policy. She also ran the Gay Straight Alliance at Ormocto High School for about a decade. Costello says she doesn't buy Premier Higgs's reasons for reviewing the policy.
The parents are not going to be in any risk whatsoever to find out that their daughter goes by John as opposed to Joan at school.
Education Minister Bill Hogan says the policy review was prompted by hundreds of complaints. But the Child and Youth Advocate asked for records of the complaints that triggered the review, and the Department of Education sent him copies of only 3 emails, sent over a period of 30 months. All of the emails make unsubstantiated claims, and one includes references to the false belief that some students could be identifying as animals and using litter boxes in schools.
But it is important for the kids to be able to use the name that they feel more comfortable with. It's good for their mental health.
Costello says this is about the safety of the students. She's taught kids who were kicked out of their home for being outed as gay or trans, some sleeping on park benches for days. She worries that changing Policy 713 could put vulnerable students in danger.
If a kid tells us that, that their parents are not accepting and that they would get thrown out of the house or they might be abused physically or mentally if their parents knew, then it's important that we keep their confidence and keep them safe while they're at school.
Minister Hogan says whatever changes come of the review would not go against the rights of LGBTQ children. He says he intends to consult with advocacy groups, but hasn't met with them yet. Hadil Ibrahim, CBC News, St. John.
A new kids show that tackles heavy topics in a sitcom format is coming to CBC TV this fall. Auntie Bee's house is set in a foster home. Eli Glasner sat down with the show's creator and uncovered the personal story behind the series.
Take 1A on the mark.
In a Toronto studio, Auntie Bee's house is taking shape. It's a preschool show set in a home for Zach, Kadisha, and Shelley, all kids in foster care.
What is it, Auntie Bee? Ooh, what's in the ball?
As their foster mom, Auntie Bee, Kalela Brooks knows the story well because it's built on her own experiences.
I was in foster care from the ages of 2 and aged out until I was 21.
Being in school as a foster kid wasn't easy.
Everyone knew and I stood out. So that was hard. And I was tall. I'm a tall woman.
Yeah.
So because I was tall and plus my clothing didn't look good. I wasn't kept, meaning, I might not have brushed my hair. I might not have brushed my teeth.
Behind the colorful sets and sitcom soundtrack is an idea, a place where kids can feel love no matter what their family looks like. Executive producer Michelle Melanson says the concept resonated with her because her husband, the co-executive producer himself, was adopted.
He came to me and said, how do you feel about adopting for our second child? So we actually went to China and adopted our daughter, and she was in the foster system when we got her at 11 months old.
Everyone here is working to make a show that takes on the real issues foster kids face.
I think often we present too much of a rosy view. Kids do cry. Kids get angry.
Auntie B explores the anxiety of a parental visit.
What if the tooth fairy still can't find me?
Whether the tooth fairy will be able to find Shelley's new home or a child still hanging on to a special item.
Khadijah, what's going on? Why don't you want to get rid of those old shoes?
Because my mom gave them to me and they're special, okay?
Even with Auntie B's youngest actors, such as Claire Poon, there's a feeling the show is special.
I think that it'll show that all families are kind of different and just it's always beautiful in your own way.
For Kalela Brooks, to see her experiences turned into a vehicle that could help children, it's emotional.
And this is about letting those children know that somebody loves them.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to be sad sometimes.
Well, Auntie B's is imaginary. There's a very real shortage of foster parents across Canada. Daria Allen Ebron is the Executive Director of Family and Children's Services in Guelph. She's excited about a show that could encourage future foster caregivers.
I think it's an excellent goal for the show. They are some of the most compassionate, kind, warm, nurturing people that I have met.
And for those worried young viewers aren't ready for the situations foster kids face,
the fact that their stories aren't being told. And so this show is about inspiring children. And even though the topics are difficult, it's all about being able to let them know that even in difficult conversations, there's somebody here to listen and someone here to see them through those challenges.
Auntie B's House is scheduled to start airing this fall on CBC and CBC Gem.
Have you ever seen a bear do the boogie woogie?
Eli Glassner, CBC News, Toronto.
The legendary Deanne Dufresne there, whose contributions to this country's music scene have now been officially recognized. The 78-year-old singer from Montreal is one of the newest inductees into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame after this week's ceremony. And she's in good company. Deborah Cox was actually inducted last year, but made a special appearance to the plaque ceremony, where she reminded everyone why she is definitely supposed to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Easy on the eyes, hard on the heart.
Terry Clark cemented her place in the Hall of Fame, even if she didn't quite believe it.
I look at the list of people that have been inducted into this, and now I feel like I'm part of a club that I'm waiting to get kicked out of again.
Clark's friend Jan Arden would beg to differ. She called Clark one of the most determined musicians she's ever met.
I don't recall any occasion where we found ourselves in the same room, Terry, that you didn't haul out a guitar and start playing songs.
Montreal jazz pianist Oliver Jones is now in the Hall of Fame. He's been playing piano since the age of 5, 83 years ago, and he developed a novel piano act to keep audiences entertained.
I was able to play from underneath the piano, and two things like the splits, and my big closing act was I would have a dish towel across the piano and play on top.
And finally, Trooper rocked the Hall of Fame with Rick Mercer describing what the band meant to him growing up.
I have fond memories of pretending to be sick and staying home from school so I could sneak into my sister's room, put on the record and sing Raise a Little Hell into my Superman brush from Avon. At the time, I believed Raise a Little Hell was the greatest Canadian rock anthem of all time. 43 years later, I don't just believe that, I know it to be true.
So here's to Trooper and all the inductees, and let's hope they'll keep raising a little hell. You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.
Raise a little hell, raise a little